Listen, Socrates, to a tale that's strange but true, as once attested by Solon, the wisest of the 7 sages. He was a relative and a great friend of our ancestor Drapides, as he often mentions in his poems. He told our grandfather Critias, and the old man, in turn, told us that our city in ancient times did great and admirable deeds, later forgotten due to time and loss of people. I will tell what I heard, as an ancient tale, from a man who was himself far from young. Yes, at that time our grandfather was, by his own words, about 90 years old, and I was at most 10. In Egypt, our grandfather began, at the top of the delta, where the Nile splits into streams, there's a nome called Sais. The main city of this nome is Sais, which, by the way, is where King Amasis was from. The city's patron is a goddess named Neith in Egyptian, and according to the locals, she's Athena in Greek. They are quite friendly towards the Athenians and claim some kinship with them. Subtitles by A. Sinakaya, proofreader A. Yegorova. Solon recounted that when he arrived there during his travels, he was received with great honor. When he began to inquire about ancient times from the most knowledgeable priests, he realized that neither he nor any of the Greeks knew much about these matters. Once, intending to shift the conversation to old legends, he tried to tell them our myths about the earliest events, about Phoroneus, revered as the first man, and about how Deucalion and Pyrrha survived the flood. He attempted to trace the genealogy of their descendants and calculate the number of generations since those times. Then one of the priests, a very elderly man, exclaimed, "Ah, Solon, Solon, you Greeks are always children, and among you there is no elder." "Why do you say that?" asked Solon. "You are all young in mind," he replied, "because your minds retain no tradition from old times, passed down from generation to generation, and no learning aged by time. The reason is this. There have been and will be many and various destructions of humanity. The most terrible are due to fire and water, while others are less significant due to thousands of other calamities. Hence the widespread story among you about Phaethon, son of Helios, who once supposedly harnessed his father's chariot but couldn't steer it along his father's path, burning everything on earth and perishing himself by a thunderbolt. Granted, this story has the form of a myth, but it contains truth indeed. The bodies revolving in the sky around the earth deviate from their paths, and thus, at certain intervals, everything on earth perishes in a great fire. The traditions preserved by us are older than all, although it is true that in all lands where excessive cold or heat does not prevent it, the human race always exists in greater or lesser numbers. Whatever glorious or great deed or remarkable event occurs, whether in our land or any country we hear of, all this from ancient times is recorded in writings we keep in our temples. Meanwhile, among you and other nations, every time writing and everything else necessary for city life develops, floods from the heavens descend again and again, like a plague, leaving only the illiterate and unlearned among you. And you start all over again, as if just born, knowing nothing of what happened in ancient times in our country or your own.
Atlantis, a mighty city, lost in legends, lives and ages. A proud and strong people of Atlantis fell to oblivion. Not even its kings, direct descendants of gods, could help. All is mortal, all passes, all changes. But these changes spark something new. So it was with Atlantis. Atlantis was first mentioned by Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Plato said the city was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, 9,000 years ago. Since Plato's time, 11,300 years separate us from Atlantis. Besides Plato, other ancient authors like Pliny, Herodotus, Posidonius, Diodorus, and possibly Aristotle mentioned Atlantis. Unlike Plato's detailed island description, later mentions, including ancient Greek and Roman works, are episodic and based on Plato. The dialogue Critias, where the philosopher described Atlantis, wasn't finished. Historians don't agree on why Plato didn't finish his work. Some think the author ran out of time. Others suggest it was intentional. Others believe the Atlantis story is fiction, and Plato had nothing new. Some are sure there was more, but it didn't survive due to circumstances. The Atlantis legend regained popularity in the Renaissance, and later, in the 19th century, appeared more in mystics' works, gaining new details. Unfortunately, much of this info depends on those who passed it down, making it hard to verify. This also applies to Plato's legend. Yet the details of Atlantis' life and fall, as told in Timaeus and Critias, are more specific. This is what has fueled the search for the lost island for centuries. Troy's discovery in 1873 by Heinrich Schliemann, once a mythical city, gave hope that other legendary cities might be real. Since the 19th century, efforts to find the Atlanteans' homeland have grown. The 21st century, with its tech, might be an era of great finds, including archaeological, but many contradictions and issues, like waters was that once washed away Atlantis' capital, plunge us into uncertain times. Yet, today's tools for seeking ancient legacies differ greatly from the 20th century. For example, Google Earth lets us find unknown structures via satellite, some man-made. Using aircraft de-icing tech helps find ancient cities under Mesoamerican jungles and Amazon silt. Mass tourism and photo-video capabilities help find new historical sites, and the internet quickly spreads the word. Research on the Atlantic Ocean floor showed no large land areas beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So, an island 3,000 stadia long and 2,000 wide, or 540 by 360 kilometers, likely never existed. If Plato described real events, Atlantis should be sought elsewhere. The original source about the ancient city shouldn't be taken literally, but the legend interpreted. This is what many Atlantis seekers did in the 20th and early 21st centuries. They sent the lost island to various places: Crete, the Black Sea, the Carpathians, Spain and Portugal's coasts, the Caribbean, South America, Tiahuanaco in the Andes, even Antarctica. Just a partial list of interpretations of Plato's description. We went further, searching for sunken Atlantis in an unlikely place, the Sahara Desert, in the unusual Richat Structure, or Eye of the Sahara. The Sahara Desert's full history is still hidden in the sands of time. Many researchers believe that not long ago, by historical standards, this region was a flourishing land. 23,000 years ago, the whole Sahara was green. Rivers flowed here, and north and south of the Richat structures were large lakes Ordar and Kifa. The humid climate with some changes, lasted until 3600 BC. And 6,000 years ago, the desert was water-rich. Forests rustled, rivers were full of fish. Flowers bloomed, and animals were plenty. Hunting tribes pursued them. Only 5,500 years ago, due to unclear processes, the Sahara began to become what it is today, a realm of stone and sand. One of the main archaeological proofs of this can still be found in the Sahara today. Locals often sell stone arrowheads from the Neolithic era they have found. Sometimes you can find such artifacts yourself. Ancient petroglyphs also tell this story. They show giraffes, hippos, animals now only in tropical Africa. Traveling to Mauritania, we never guessed how many river and lake traces we'd see near the Richat. Countless dried riverbeds are here. Some riverbeds are hundreds of meters wide, and dried lakes stretch to the horizon. In rainy seasons, streams refill, like veins bringing life to the desert. Near Wadan, where we stayed, there's a small dam. Another big water source here, showing Sahara's river scale, is the drying Taman Rasset. 5,000 years ago, its sand-covered bed stretched over 500 kilometers in Algeria and Mauritania. The river flowed into the Atlantic. Richat's origin sparked debates among both enthusiasts and geologists. The most popular theory suggested the Eye of the Sahara might be an impact crater or a dormant volcano's mouth. Experts now say the Richat is a geological dome formed by erosion of sedimentary and igneous rocks. As a natural site confirmed on location, the Eye of the Sahara's ring structure is unique and still unexplained. Richat's ring shape has 2 outer and 3 inner rings. Inner rings are plains with water traces. Outer ones are mountain elevations. The Eye of the Sahara's structure resembles Plato's Atlantis. From sea to island center stretched a plain. Legend says it was the most beautiful and fertile of all plains. In the plain center, about 50 stadia from the sea, stood a low hill. On this hill lived Evanor, one of the first men, with his wife Lucipe. Their only daughter was Cleto. When Cleto reached marriage age and her parents died, Poseidon, desiring her, united with her. Poseidon fortified her hill, encircling it with alternating water and land rings. 2 land rings and 3 water ones, all larger, drawn from the island's center equidistant. This enclosure was impassable. The ships and navigation didn't exist. Plato wrote the island was mountain-closed to the north. This matches the Richat Structure's boundaries. Filling inner rings with water makes the resemblance incredible. But the coincidences don't stop there. Poseidon easily made the central island well arranged, as a god would. He drew 2 springs, one warm, one cold, and made the land provide diverse sustenance. Plato. Critias. In our Richat Structure research, like Plato's central Atlantis island, we used a dosimeter. Natural radiation usually ranges from 0.1 to 0.16 microsieverts per hour, not exceeding 0.2. We found an area where radiation was over 4 times the norm. The device urged caution. Detailed measurements showed radiation exceeded 1, reaching 1.6 microsieverts per hour. The device warned of danger. This wasn't the end. Nearby, we found another area with high radiation. Radiation here reached 1.8 microsieverts per hour. Radiation was stronger at the surface, spreading out and weakening with distance, suggesting radon gas release. If springs were here, radon could heat water, changing its temperature and taste. Mineral thermal radon springs are popular today. Kings had 2 springs, cold and hot, providing abundant, amazing tasting, healing water. They were enclosed, planted with suitable trees, and directed into baths, some open air, others warm for winter. Separately for kings, commoners, women, horses, and draft animals, each bath decorated for its purpose. Plato, Critias. In Atlantis legend, Plato writes ships entered the city through long canals. Such structures seem absent in Mauritania, but one object needs further investigation. The second eye of the Sahara expedition aimed to study it. This object is a long strip on desert ground. One end is near the Richat Structure south, the other towards the Senegal River, flowing into the Atlantic. It might be a geological formation, a huge crack over 100 kilometers long. Satellite couldn't determine its depth. The Tamanrasset riverbed discovery suggests this crack might have held water long ago. The formation's straightness suggests an artificial origin. Reality was more interesting. We expected a sand-covered crack, but found an oasis stretching straight to the horizon. Trees, shrubs, flowers grew, birds chirped, flitting from tree to tree. The depression's sloping walls and 30-meter width felt like modern artificial canals. Its sand and stone-covered bottom left depth unknown. There's still underground water here, or there wouldn't be so much greenery.
Well, 2 days of persistent advancement in the right direction, and we are at the place that we had planned in advance, as, presumably, the man-made canal of the Atlanteans, according to Plato. We're in the center of this canal. It runs just as shown in the satellite. Crack or a canal. That way is southwest, and behind me is northeast, and the structure aligns right along this arrow, which is odd in itself. We see the canal's width at the bottom, at least where the bottom is now, though it's all covered with stones, maybe 2 or 3 meters deep. I highly recommend to those who want to test themselves and feel like Robinsons, and maybe find artifacts of lost Atlantis. You're welcome. We definitely won't find everything here, not even a fraction of a percent, if they were here. But even if there were no Atlanteans here, this place is still mesmerizing and interesting. and the tours is starting to gather groups, not only to discover, but also just to enjoy.
Dmitry Pavlov discovered a piece of breccia, a volcanic rock abundantly present in the very center of the eye of the Sahara. However, in the area where we were, there was neither breccia nor other volcanic rocks. This suggested that the channel was indeed connected to the Richat Structure, and the rock was brought here by a water flow. Or what we consider to be naturally cemented rock was actually an artificial formation. Of course, such an assumption seems quite bold, but it cannot be completely dismissed as an incredible possibility either. The fact is that even modern concrete turns to dust over time, and in a very short period by historical standards. For example, later, when we were already in Nouakchott, we came across concrete blocks that formed a path from the hotel to the shore of the Atlantic Ocean. These blocks were probably no more than a decade old, but they were already crumbling in places.
The Atlantic's effect was clear, but nearly 12,000 years have passed since Plato's events. There's a documentary, Life After People, by the History Channel. It shows how cities and the planet change if humans vanish. In 5,000 years, only the Hoover Dam and Egypt's pyramids will remain, and in 10,000 years, just the pyramids. Symbolic, right? Without a clear example, it's tough to say if modern materials last as long as the film claims. But time has two faces. It's both a creator and a destroyer, erasing its creations. Only reason can stop or delay this process.
Мы идем проверять легенду, это делать нам не впервой. Разгадать секрет пирамиды и спуститься в бункер богов. А сейчас, пусть и без поддержки, без лопаты за ним зонтом, мы идем искать Атлантиду, о которой писал Плато. Мы заглянем в глаза Сахары, в каналы структуры решат. А песок, жара или буря вряд ли смогут нам помешать. И в пустых безжизненных далях, где-то там на краю земном, мы найдем свою Атлантиду, о которой писал Плато.
We walked about 2.53 kilometers along the canal. Then we used a drone to see the same distance from above. No clear signs of the canal being man-made were visible. However, its length and shape still raised doubts about it being a natural formation. So for the next expedition, we need to cover 20 to 25 kilometers of the canal to try and answer the question, is this canal man-made, or is it a natural, yet very unusual channel? From the sea, they extended the canal in a triplet, widened and 100 feet deep, and in length it stretched 50 stadia to the outermost of the water rings. Thus, they created access from the sea into this ring like a harbor, providing a sufficient passage even for the largest ships. Plato, Critias. The Tamanrasset River flowed towards the ocean 5,000 years ago. According to Plato, Atlantis is separated from us by 11,500 years. In that time, a lot of sediment could have accumulated, especially in the Sahara with its shifting sands. Moreover, there's another interesting scene in Mauritania. The shelf on the Atlantic coast of Mauritania resembles a mudflow, a trace of a powerful cataclysm that once washed away a significant mass of the upper land layer. Underwater research of this object is complex and costly. However, if the theory is correct, it might be the trace of the very catastrophe that erased Plato's Atlantis from the face of the earth. However, not everything is smooth. If the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias are interpreted literally, obvious discrepancies with the structure of the Richat are immediately apparent. This includes the location, some size differences, and much more. Yet the main obstacle to identifying the Eye of the Sahara as Atlantis is the complete absence of traces of any developed architecture, which would be inevitable with such serious construction scales described by Plato. In essence, all descriptions of the urban lifestyle of Atlantis have virtually no archaeological evidence today. Hopes of quickly finding any fragment of a wall or statue, or at least something to compare with an ancient structure, were not fulfilled. We even made 2 excavations for luck. The first at the confluence of 2 small dried-up riverbeds, and the second in the vast expanse of a large dried-up lake. Both excavations were just under 2 meters deep. In the first case, we encountered a layer of rather large gravel, and in the second, huge masses of dried silt, which once seemed to be a layer of fertile soil, washed from the surrounding valleys, hills, and mountains. One might say that Atlantis, as an urban and cultural phenomenon, never existed in the Richat Structure, if not for some artifacts that stand out from the general picture of primitive hunter-gatherer tribes that inhabited modern Mauritania. There is practically no archaeology in Mauritania. The museum's collection is presented in 2 halls on the 1st and 2nd floors. The 2nd floor is entirely dedicated to the Islamic period of Mauritania's history. The 1st floor's collection is very sparse. In 10 minutes, you can walk through the small room and briefly view all the exhibits. In 30 minutes, you can do this while examining each artifact and reading the short descriptions on some showcases. Only the chief curator of the museum might be able to say something reasonable about the purpose of the presented artifacts, but that's not certain. He was not present, and the guards prohibiting filming knew almost nothing about the artifacts on display. However, they greatly hindered photography, let alone video recording. Of all the items in the museum, only 3 groups of artifacts are worth noting, as the rest look quite ordinary and are unlikely to interest those not immersed in the study of the archaeology and culture of Southwest Sahara. However, one such group of artifacts consists of perfectly polished marble balls. The purpose of the balls is unknown. They were found in burial sites. Additionally, it's interesting that the well-polished balls are almost identical in size, while those that look crooked and skewed differ significantly in size. The balls were placed in the mouth of the deceased, meaning their use was ritualistic. But why exactly polished balls were originally created is a big question. Moreover, several more questions arise. First, where exactly was the marble sourced from? There are marble quarries in Mauritania, but information on their exact location has not been found. Second, are the balls natural formations? Third, if they are artificial, why did primitive societies need such high-quality processing of stone balls, which differ greatly from the processing of other stone artifacts? Fourth, why are the sizes of the polished balls almost identical? And fifth, what was the meaning behind their ritual use? And why did marble balls become sacred objects? None of these questions have been answered. Moreover, we encountered marble balls in private collections, but no one knows anything about them except their ritual purpose. A similar practice existed in ancient Egypt. But where is Egypt, and where is Mauritania? And what is this common ritual cult that managed to establish itself in different parts of the African continent in such ancient times? Another group of artifacts shares one important detail with the marble balls. No one really knows why they were created or by whom. These artifacts are stone discs. The discs are found in the Sahara, mostly south of the Richat Structure. At least, colleagues from the She-Wolf Club found several of these in the more southern regions. We only saw them with desert traders and in museums, both private and in the city museum of Nouakchott. In total, including museum exhibits and fragments, we saw about a dozen discs. Most were about the same size, but one disc was very small, just a few centimeters in diameter. The discs are made in a similar style. There's always a hole in the center, and the edges of the disc taper. All artifacts are quite well polished. Some edges have chips that resemble artificial sharpening. We sent a few of these discs for geological study, and here are the preliminary conclusions the experts reached. The discs are made of quartzite. The hardness of the quartz mineral is 7 on the Mohs scale. The surface of all discs is worn, covered with dust and mineral debris. No processing marks remain on it. Numerous iron microparticles are noticeable. Perhaps these discs were processed with an iron tool, or later something iron affected the stone surface. Several microparticles are intriguing, possibly representing titanium alloys and compounds. The data obtained needs further clarification and understanding. Research on the discs will continue. Many colleagues were and remain skeptical about these discs, considering them something like grain grinders or other primitive tools of ancient humans. But what intrigues about these artifacts is that no one knows what they are or what they were used for, and the grain grinders are nearby. Both traders and private museums, and in Nouakchott, all told us what items were and how they were used in antiquity. They couldn't explain only the purpose of the spheres and discs. Regarding the latter, the Capital Museum suggested they might be bracelets. Yet some information about similar discs was found. In North Africa, particularly in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, the Capsian culture existed from the 8th to the 3rd millennium BC. Its representatives created stone maces almost identical in shape to the Mauritanian discs. The difference is that Capsian maces are noticeably rougher and lack tapering edges. Judging by the chips on these edges, at least some discs were indeed used as maces or other striking tools, but there's a feeling that their original purpose was something else. Another interesting theory about the discs is that the artifacts are akin to modern money. However, the discs could have been used both as tools and as money. After all, you can stick a ballpoint pen in your nose for decoration. In general, we are still waiting for the analysis results of the first disc. Discs come in different materials. In the Nouakchott Museum display, there are several similar artifacts, including a Capsian culture mace and a disc more reminiscent in shape of its Chinese, Baikal, and Mexican counterparts, and classic Mauritanian discs, and in the neighboring display case, a crooked disc with strange notches. As for the mace theory, the diameter of the inner hole of the discs is 6-7 centimeters, meaning the shaft must have been quite massive, and this in a region where trees were scarce even in the Neolithic. As for the small disc, judging by its size, a mace made from it could chase flies and cockroaches, and grain probably could also be ground if Thumbelina did it. The ancient hall of the Nouakchott Museum provided quite unexpected food for thought. Even in a small exhibition, there was room for seemingly understandable items that nevertheless baffle. Here's what it's about. On the walls of the ancient hall in the Nouakchott Museum hang photos of various objects and artifacts not presented in the museum. However, they are important elements not only of Mauritania's history, but of the region as a whole. In the photo, you can see one such stand, depicting images of rock drawings showing chariots. All would be fine, but the dating of such drawings gives an age of more than 4,000 years. The question arises, where did chariots come from in those times on the territory of modern Mauritania? And what were they doing there? After all, the Sahara Desert already existed then. Only modern SUVs can move through the desert. And even then, various incidents like breakdowns occur. Roads in Mauritania are bad even now. Moreover, about 4,000 years ago, the wheel is believed to have just begun to appear in ancient Egypt, one of the cradles of human civilization. So where would not just a wheel, but already harnessed chariots come from in such a remote and seemingly useless region for the ancient world on the other end of the African continent? The museum couldn't answer this question, but here you can find some reference to Plato's Atlantis. According to the ancient Greek philosopher, Atlantis was known for its chariots, and the city even had a hippodrome. Only 11,000 years ago, in the middle of the largest ring, they had a racetrack for horse races, a stadium wide, running the whole circle. In case of war, each leader had to provide a sixth of a war chariot, totaling 10,000 chariots, plus 2 riding horses with riders, a 2-horse team without a chariot, a warrior with a small shield to dismount and fight on foot, a driver for the team, 2 hoplites, a baggage handler, a slinger, 3 stone, throwers and spearmen, 4 sailors, to gather enough for 200 ships. Plato, Critias. Well, the depiction of ancient chariots is more indirect evidence that the southwestern Sahara is an unusual and promising region for study. And yet, despite contradictions with some parts of Atlantis' description in Plato's dialogues, is it possible for there to be so many coincidences by chance?
What's the chance this isn't just a coincidence with Platonov's writing, but can be mathematically evaluated? You know, there's a joke. They ask a blonde, what's the chance of going out at night in New York and meeting a living dinosaur? The blonde, without much thought, says 50 to 50. Why? Well, either I meet one or I don't. I suggest using this blonde's approach to assess the lower probability level of the subtitles as Semkin editor Igorova that Plato drew from a real object called the Richat Structure. And for this, we'll act like the blonde, but more accurately. We know the probability of a fair symmetrical coin landing heads in one toss is exactly 50%. Or 1 to 2. The formula for calculating such a probability. Don't be scared. It's simple. It's 1 to 2 to the power of n, where n is the number of random, unrelated coincidences. What I listed for you, such coincidences with Plato's description and what we saw in the Richat Structure, we counted at least 13. Therefore, 1/2 to the power of 13 gives about 1.008 or 0.0000122. This is the probability that Plato acted independently of the information we saw. That is, almost 99.9% that we indeed discovered the prototype of Plato's Atlantis. Here you see on the map the water level that would cover the modern Richat Structure if the sea level rose by 400 meters. Water would flood most of the ring or circular formation. There would be elevated islands in the center. You can vary it. Instead of 400 meters, take 420 and you'll see the ring structures clearly appear. At the same time, remember that over 12,000 years, which Plato gives us for wind, air, water to have moved masses here, this profile could have changed. And by conducting such a more or less approximate, but based on our observations reconstruction, we can say with sufficient confidence, this is how the area might have looked 12,000 years ago. And compare it with Plato's description, based on his dialogues. It turns out almost 1 to 1. Central Island, first water ring. Land ring, second water ring, second land ring, third water ring, and then the area where craftsmen lived, herded cattle, and grew plants. On the southern side, remember, I mentioned the sea. If you remove the sand, there's a huge distance from the shore to that. Consider it over 40 kilometers. Just like the width of Baikal in some places. There's a strait that Plato also mentions. It's natural. At least now it looks natural. And we can start counting on our fingers. Independent events matching what we see in what Plato described: first island, second ring, third ring, fourth ring, fifth ring, sixth ring, seventh sea, eighth strait, ninth fertile land. Rivers flow here like in Plato's 10, mountains 11, and in the central part thermal healing springs 12 and channels that pass over are very similar to. Channel formations 13. This one, 2 to the power of 13, gives us a probability with 3 zeros that these are not random, unrelated events, but can be considered a proven fact that we know where Plato's Atlantis was located. Why it's not in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that can be resolved later. But such mathematical coincidences don't happen. At least, I don't believe in them. Therefore, we proceed from this fact, and we continue to search for what's still.
The language of math is strict, yet such things still seem impossible. So what should we do then? How to solve the mystery when one part of the Atlantis legend aligns closely with the geography of the Richat Structure, while another part finds no confirmation? The most likely hypothesis might be that many millennia ago, the Eye of the Sahara was indeed a wondrous and beautiful place amidst the then blooming Sahara. Ancient people often hunted here, and perhaps even set up some simple settlements. Climbing to the top of the Ardar Plateau, or one of the rings of the Eye of the Sahara, they observed the ring structure of Richat. Perhaps they even saw in its form a demonstration of divine intervention. The climate changed, lakes and rivers disappeared, and the Sahara gradually turned into a desert. The Ardar Plateau and the Richat Structure slowly, perhaps, became what they are today. But the memory and legends, passed down orally by the inhabitants of this fading garden, the tales of rare travelers, all this reached the wise priests of ancient Egypt, the cradle of human civilization. The priests hurried to record the legends of distant and beautiful lands. Should we blame them if the story might have been misunderstood or embellished? After all, the distance between Egypt and the Eye of the Sahara is almost 5,000 kilometers in a straight line. And along the way, any story grows with fantasies. We should not discount Plato's creative approach to conveying information. Not only was the legend of Atlantis embedded in the dialogues of the ancient Greek philosopher Critias, who heard it from Solon only in his youth, but it is quite possible that Plato could have invented the missing details of the story. Plato is the first European thinker to lay the foundations of objective idealism. Plato's world is a world of ideas, and the beautiful city of Athens, whose troops 1,100 years ago defeated the armada of the mighty sons of Poseidon from Atlantis, fits perfectly into this world, even though Athens itself did not exist at that time. However, everything could have been different, and some settlement of Atlanteans might have been there, but due to a powerful cataclysm, it was completely destroyed, buried under layers of silt and carried into the sea abyss. The scale of the cataclysm must have been very great, and today, more and more specialists accept the version that during the period described by Plato, planet Earth collided with some celestial body. This event in science is called the Younger Dryas Catastrophe. This catastrophe was of planetary scale. Besides the impact itself, a whole chain of powerful cataclysms swept across the Earth, from earthquakes and tsunamis to volcanic eruptions and terrible fires, traces of which are found in different regions of the planet. Such a hypothesis resonates in many mythologies of the world, but it gained the most fame in the Old Testament tradition called the myth of the Great Flood. Other gods received other countries by lot, and they began to arrange them. But Hephaestus and Athena, having a common nature as children of one father, and sharing the same love for wisdom and art, respectively, received a common lot, our country, favorable for cultivating virtues and reason. Populating it with noble men born of the earth, they instilled in their minds concepts of state organization. Their names have reached us, but their deeds are forgotten due to the calamities that destroyed their descendants, as well as the passage of time. For after the disasters, as has been said, only illiterate mountaineers survived, having heard only the names of the rulers of the country and some of their deeds. The feats and laws of their ancestors were unknown to them, except perhaps through vague rumors, and only the memorable names they gave to their children. Meanwhile, they and their descendants for many generations endured the need for the most necessary things and only thought and spoke about this need, forgetting their ancestors and ancient deeds. For the study of myths and investigations of ancient events appeared in cities simultaneously with leisure, when it was discovered that some had ready means of life, but not earlier. That is why the ancient ones reached us, but their deeds did not. Plato, Critias, in that case, unknown stone discs, marble balls, and drawings of ancient chariots. All this may turn out to be the legacy of the lost Atlantis, and Plato's legend even more truthful. But more unequivocal finds are needed than just stone artifacts of unclear purpose. The discerning viewer may be concerned about the connection of Atlantis with an ancient, highly developed civilization, whose legacy is studied by lie. But the answer may be disappointing. They are unlikely to be connected. In Plato's dialogues, the Atlanteans were famous for their chariots, but even this did not help them in the fight against the Athenians. The ancient Greek philosopher does not mention in his works anything that can link the legendary island with the technologically advanced society, qualitatively different from the one in which Plato himself lived. Therefore, there is nothing to connect DVC and Atlantis, except perhaps that the first kings of Atlantis were children of the god Poseidon, but that's too little. As is known, the gods divided all the countries of the earth among themselves by lot. They did this without strife, for it would be wrong to imagine that the gods do not know what is due to each of them, or that they are capable, knowing that something should belong to another, still to start a dispute over this thing. So, having rightfully received the desired share by lot, each of the gods settled in their country. Having settled, they began to nurture us, their property and wards, as shepherds nurture flocks, but if the latter act on bodies with physical violence, and herd cattle with the whip, then the gods chose a kind of helmsman's place, from where it is most convenient to direct the obedient living creature, and acted with persuasion, like a rudder of the soul, as their plans suggested. So they ruled the entire race of mortals. Plato, Critias. We are used to dividing the world into black and white, yes and no, truth and fiction, forgetting that the convenience of perception does not always reflect objective reality. All myths must have a grain of truth. Guided by his aims, Plato likely added much fiction to the Atlantis legend. Yet, the idea that the Richat Structure is a geographical model of Atlantis seemed shared by all expedition members. In the end, it doesn't matter if our expedition's main conclusion is true, or if the eye of the Sahara's likeness to the legendary island is just a series of coincidences. Either way, Atlantis will remain the dream it has been for millennia. People will always seek their own Atlantis, as long as the spirit of romance and the urge to discover new horizons live within them. In this sense, one hopes humanity never finds Atlantis, but keeps searching for it again and again.
Здесь задолго до нас люди жили, здесь же встретили страшный конец. Их историю нам приоткрыли трое странных в пустыне колец. Из забвенья страницы вернулись все, что было эпохи назад. Я хочу, чтобы вы прикоснулись к древней тайне структуры Richat. Для себя они все уж решили в глубине скоротечных веков, и избавиться очень спешили от стесняющих нудных оков. Для себя они все уже решили в глубине скоротечных веков, и избавиться очень спешили от стесняющих нудных оков. Пусть во многом они преуспели, не усвоен был главный урок. А смирение из нас не хотели, и богами назначен был срок. Мы давно уже все позабыли, но сюжет этой песни не нов. Сказ о тех, кто богатство нажили, а к экзамену был не готов. Своей не очнулись, кто-то молча нажал на курок. Темно-синие волны сомкнулись, и поднялся стеною песок.